questions I used to ask growing up in church that never really had an.
Hey, so I grew up in a very traditional Southern Baptist church. So the Southern Baptist church I grew up in, up until I was maybe in college, we only had a piano and an organ. You could not wear pants to church. The women couldn't. So it was a very traditional Southern Baptist church, right? And so I mainly went there with my grandmother. And we would, of course, go to Sunday school, kind of be at church all day, kind of traditional Southern Baptist upbringing. And I'm going to tell you why I didn't have a lot of questions and didn't get answers. I'm going to tell you how I came to stop asking questions. So, if you grew up in church, you have these Bible stories, right? That, circle around in your Sunday school lesson every so often. Daniel in the lion's den, of course, Adam and Eve in the garden, David and Goliath. There are these like basic Bible stories. And so one of the stories was about doubting Thomas. So for those of you who might not be familiar, basically like Thomas, he's one of the disciples. And after Jesus is resurrected, he basically is like, I ain't seen Jesus, so I ain't going to believe it till I see him. And, after a certain number of days, Jesus does present himself. Thomas, sees him. And then he believes, oh my God, it is Jesus. You've been resurrected. And essentially Jesus says something to the effect of like, okay, I'm going to bless the people who believed before they saw me. I'm not going to bless you basically because you had to see me before you believed. Like your faith wasn't strong enough essentially. So I remember listening to that story. I'm sure I heard it multiple times, but I think I was around maybe 9 or 10. And that story, I'm talking about, it stuck with me. It bothered me because the way that, because all these stories have a little moral you're supposed to learn. So the moral they were trying to teach was that when it comes to these teachings, you should just believe them blindly. You shouldn't ask no questions. Jesus was resurrected. You should have no doubts, no questions, or you're a doubting Thomas. You'll even hear that expression used about things. Don't be a doubting Thomas. So I was just like, okay, especially back then, as far as we know, ain't nobody died and came back alive. Okay, not nobody we didn't see. So it seems reasonable. I mean, to me, Thomas seemed like the most reasonable person in the story, to ask a question about, maybe let me see some evidence about this. There's so many other explanations that would have made sense other than Jesus died and came back to life in his real flesh body. I mean, there's so many other explanations. So I'm having a question. Was he doubting or did he just have a question? So that was my question. Why is it so wrong to have an inquiry about something or a question? I don't know how I asked it back at that time, but I mean, that seems totally reasonable. And so, because the message I was getting was, y'all should just listen and believe what people are telling you and don't ask any questions. And I was just like, no. And I'm going to tell you one of the main reasons is because my grandma was in that church. And I had learned a lot about people in the church, because my grandma used to cook. And, I'd be hearing the chatter with the old ladies. And it's like, I know a little bit of tea about y'all. So I'm already not believing what y'all saying firsthand because I know too much about y'all, period. Because I didn't heard the ladies chit-chatting. But now you want me to just believe anything folks be saying? That's the message? But I'm going to tell you something. I asked that question and baby, I was basically like, you a down Thomas, okay? And I can't remember what happened, but somehow that trickled back to my grandmother or something. And she had a talking to me about it. And I think it got back to my mom even because my mom wasn't always going to church with us. And so anyway, what I learned from that was that you better not ask any questions. I learned from that lesson that when you are in this space, it is wrong to ask questions because if you do, you will be called a doubting Thomas and, is clearly looked down upon. And I honestly think that is also what drove me to be science minded because in science, that's part of the whole purpose is to ask questions. And even when you're going through the scientific method, it's you're trying to prove your hypothesis wrong. Everything you're doing is trying to prove this idea you have that it's not true, you know? And then only when you do so many things and you can't prove that, then you say, okay, this is the most likely explanation. And then also, as you get new information, right, you change the theory that you have and you change your understanding. Like, that's how knowledge grows. So, I mean, that's what I learned. So after that time, I had a lot of questions, but I pretty much didn't bring anything else up after that.